6.5 hours. Is it not that far?
I don't think it is. Been a while.
No. Yeah, it's almost 7.
7?
Well, you know, unless you drive like that, it's,
Yeah, that can't be right. Are you on the bike, or did you just on the bike?
That's not walk.
Only 167 miles.
Some routes are closed.
Yeah, well, you can still go up through Montana and go like Sky. But we usually go over, was it Toby Pass?
You can't go
So how many miles do you say?
Yeah, that's true. What's that? Oh, no, 400. Sorry.
Yeah, I did too initially.
You can't, I don't know, Toby's the same bear too.
Well, I do know that it's open in the wintertime generally, unless there's like really bad. Because I know we took the teens there. Winter Toby Pass, it's so small. You could see, I mean, you could not see lines. It's just like, I hope we're not falling off. All the kids were in the back singing, having a good time. I'm like reaching out the window trying to stream ice on the windshield as it's raining. Yeah, it's stressful.
Something else went down. Four things.
Come on.
Is anything on here that you think
I said, stop.
I'll walk the rest of
I
it.
said, stop, just stop. What? I'm getting out. I'm walking down. You can go back, go up the bed, turn around, shop. You can get on the way back. And I walked there.
Yeah,
I was like,
I'm not about it.
I can't take it. My arms racing.
Yeah, it was Mountain Road. They can,
I just don't like it.
I don't care what time of the year it is. Maybe just about 6 hours. Especially not when you're I don't like when it's clear out.
yeah,
But if I did, I can just easily run on race.
right. Oh, yeah, there's that.
And I like where you go to
That was actually.
It's long. All right, well, good morning. An announcement, well, not really an announcement, just some information that you probably already know, but next week, I don't know how many people are going to go to Cody for the rendezvous thing. So John's going to be teaching in here, and then Ty's going to be preaching. So we will probably finish this thing on angels on the 17th, and then we will get into dreams unless something else interests me. So that's what we're doing. Okay, one of the things that I was thinking about over the last couple of days that I found also interesting is, and then we will get into the rest of this. We may finish this today. I don't know. It depends upon how much you guys talk. Thank you for laughing at that. Or don't talk. Yeah, right. So, you know, when you look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 11, and I hadn't thought about this before, but one of the things interesting I find about angels ministering to Jesus after his temptations Is there anything about that that you find interesting or unique or curious? And I asked this because I didn't think about it till a couple of days ago, and I thought, that's really interesting. Anything about that kind of piques your interest? What I find curious is that the Son of God, God incarnate, needed angels to minister to him. He needed the encouragement as a human. In other words, he didn't get through the temptations because he was God. And when he got to the end of it, he's like, I'm good. I'm God and I have the Spirit and et cetera, et cetera. He actually had angels, messengers of God, that came down to minister, to serve, to take care of his needs. And so when you go to Hebrews and it talks about that, Jesus understands us because he was tempted just like we are. He dealt with the flesh and the things of this world just like we do. And so after his temptations and the intensity of that, angels ministered him in whatever way that they did, in whatever way that apparently he needed. And also, Matthew gives us 3. Mark tells us that from the time he got into the wilderness, throughout his fast for the 40 days, he's tempted. There's wild animals in that area. Mark kind of gives us a very interesting view of what happened. So it would then make sense that when he gets done with that, he is mentally and physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, possibly spiritually. So it just kind of gives a different angle about Jesus after that happens, and that angels are needed to go and take care of him in whatever way that they do. So I find that both interesting, encouraging, and enlightening in terms of maybe how we sometimes view Jesus. And then in Luke chapter 22 and verse 43, if you want to go there and look that up with me, Luke 22 and verse 43. And I don't know if you've looked up or read through Luke 22 in a while, but there's a lot of very interesting stories there, at least that I find. This is where Peter is being asked to permission to be sifted like wheat. A lot of really interesting words there also. So Luke 22 and verse 43. This is obviously Jesus' time of prayer, his process of asking God to take this cup away from him, this cup of suffering. In verse 43, then an angel from heaven appeared and strengthened him. And so then he prayed more fervently, and he was in such agony of spirit that his sweat fell to the ground like great drops of blood. And then he stood up again and had this conversation with his disciples. So it wasn't as if it was at the end of these 3 prayers that he does, this triad of prayers, but it was right in the middle of them that these. At least in the translation, it's a singular, but this messenger from heaven appeared, and the word there for strengthened is invigorates. So much like in Matthew 4, here right before the trial and the crucifixion, he is invigorated by a messenger from heaven, strengthened, whatever that word may be. So in both of those cases, almost at the beginning of his ministry in Matthew 4, and then at the end of his ministry, right before the crucifixion, angels, messengers from heaven are involved in strengthening, invigorating him, possibly very much just physically to help him push through.
He's doing this and really setting an example for his disciples, at least the 3 he has to accompany him.
Yeah,
And,
right.
Of course, they keep following asleep. And that last time he says, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not
Yeah.
enter their
And temptation. Yep.
So
Yep.
it's like, he understands that he has to be there in the garden praying deeply for
Yeah.
agony,
Yeah.
with the angels attending to him, because
Yeah.
he is trying not to fall into temptation.
Right.
And he's
Right.
trying to get his
Yeah.
disciples to
To
see.
do-
Maybe he's the thing.
Same thing. Same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Since Genesis, we see that God has sent angels to strengthen and preserve his people. If you think back to the angels that went to Sodom and they rescued Lot and his wife and daughters,
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
them
True.
out of
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
before the cities were destroyed. And and I think it's encouraging to know that he will strengthen us to resist whatever temptation and whatever trials we're going through in life.
Yeah.
It's just our job, like our Lord showed himself to be faithful.
Yeah.
And if we're determined to be faithful, we're gonna come out the other end okay.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. And it's also interesting to me that the 3 times you find Jesus having Peter, James, and John accompany him, and this may be some kind of crooked dots to connect, but there have been those times when people have stated or thought, if I could see a miracle, if I could have some kind of, grand gesture from God, man, faithfulness would not be a problem. And yet we find for Peter, James, and John at the transfiguration, at the raising of Jairus' daughter, and then here, they fall asleep. Now, granted, they may be exhausted. They may have gone through this whole thing with him, and they're just, they can't stay awake. They're about to fall over. But with even those things that they went through with Jesus very personally, and those moments, at least initially, didn't seem to change a whole lot. And even in Matthew 18, I think it is, when you have the young man with the demon possession and thrusts him all over the place, and the father came to Jesus and said, "Hey, your disciples couldn't do this," and this was after they had apparently been doing it often. From Matthew chapter 10, they had all the miraculous signs given to them, and they still struggled with that in that moment for whatever reason. I don't think we're necessarily told. So we have to make sure that, like Jesus here, this very upfront prayer from Jesus. And I know a lot of lessons have been given on this, but think about Jesus's honesty here with the Father, and then as Luke records it here, I don't want to do this. I don't. And so it's not as if Jesus and the Father are having this little cubbyhole conversation and don't let people know that I'm struggling. But it's written down for us here that Jesus cries out to the Father, I don't want to do this. Are you sure we've thought of everything? But not my will be done, but yours. Not my desire, but yours. And then as Jesus is doing this, what happens? A messenger from God, from heaven, is sent to strengthen, to invigorate him toward his goal. And so I think Kent, you make a great point there that while we're going through our challenges, we're honest with God. I'm scared, I'm frustrated, I'm lazy, I'm selfish. I don't want to do this. Please invigorate me. Please strengthen me. Please give me wisdom, give me direction, et cetera, et cetera. And in whatever way God's going to do that, if our desire is to be, faithful, to be intent on following the Spirit, that angel is going to make a difference. That influence from God is going to make a difference for us. All right, so the next one, Matthew chapter 28. Being very upfront with you, the only thing that bothers me about how I've put all this together is it's kind of, I'm so big on context. These are kind of spotty in terms of the moments. So one of the reasons I think it's taken us a little while to get through all this is I am trying to get there and then provide a little bit of context for us as opposed to just hitting what the angel does. So in Matthew chapter 28, obviously the resurrection. Early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, and an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. And then the angel spoke to the women after the guards got knocked out. Don't be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He's risen from the dead, just as he said would happen. Come and see his body where he was lying. So without us being obvious, what are some of the things the angels do here? Or at least if this is accurate in terms of translation, singular and angel, what does this angel specifically do around this tomb?
Sits on a rock.
Yeah, what's he do before that?
He shook the whole earth and rolled the stone.
Yes. He shakes the earth, rolls the stone, and as many lessons have been given, how heavy are these stones? They're massive. It takes a lot of men to put those things into place, and they had a lot of measures put into place so that men just couldn't go over there and easily move it. So this stone, this angel rolls this stone away and then just kind of chills on top of it. What's up? Just sits on top of the stone, and these women are there, and he's like, hey, he isn't here. Why do you think he's here? What would give you the idea that he's here? And it's almost as if the angel goes back to these very specific times where Jesus said, I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to be beaten, crucified. Then, remember what he says? I'm going to raise from the dead. It happened in Matthew 16. And yet, as most of us as humans are challenged with this, what did they hear? You're dead. Our Messiah, our King, our freedom banner guy is going to die by who? Who's going to kill him? The Jewish leaders. They're going to not only beat him, but they're going to kill him. So from, this angel tells him he's not here. He has risen from the dead just as what? Just as he said. And he told you many times this was going to happen. And then what's he say? Come on in. Come on in. Do you want to see where his body was? This is where he lay. Now I'll go quickly tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead, and he is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. And what's the last thing he says? Remember what I've told you. So when you get to the disciples, tell them what I've told you. He's risen. He's not here. He is alive. One of the challenges I think we have as human beings, especially if you were raised in a Christian home at whatever level, how many times have you heard this story? And I'm not saying that it minimizes the story, but how many times have you heard this? As opposed to slowing down and this angel just appears. Do you think they could see the angel? Obviously they could, because there's this whole conversation between an angel and these women in terms of why they're there. Do they seem to question at all what this spiritual being says. They follow him in, they see him there, they go on to do what the angel told them to do. So the women ran quickly from the tomb. They were very frightened, but also filled with great joy, and they rushed to give the disciples the angel's message. Yes. Wait, what's your name? Okay, I don't know you. Get away from me. I'm here to see this, my dead Christ. Yeah.
You know, I'm kind of stuck on that phrase, as he said.
Uh-huh.
I do wonder if it was intended as a rebuke. It's hard with us, with
Yeah,
our translation, to see
yeah,
it. And I know, people send me emails saying, now, what do I do? How do I do this? I say,
Right.
well, as I told you yesterday,
Were you listening, 24 hours a
I
day?
intended as a rebuke. So I do wonder if the angel said, hey, you guys remember what he said, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And at the same time, he's making sure they understand that prophecy has been fulfilled.
Yes. And that's what I'm not getting across very well is that's what this angel is telling them. Prophecy has been stated not once, not twice, maybe 24 times. You just didn't hear it, and now you're seeing what you didn't hear and listen to. This has been said, and now you're seeing this prophecy that you did not hear. And to that point, when you look at, again, I keep on wanting to think it's Matthew 18, with the disciples not being able to heal the demon-possessed boy of the father. And Jesus says to them, I don't really like the translations we have because I think they are a little harsh. Jesus essentially said, you guys are so easily moved. You are so easily persuaded by this physical realm. You've been doing this for however long they'd been doing it. You've been healing. You've possibly been, depossessing demons. You've been doing this for, 6 months, 8 months, however long it had been. Why is this moment difficult for you? Why is this situation hard for you? You were so easily moved. So again, whether it's a rebuke or whether he's just laying in front of them, you should be able to do this. This is not hard. And yet you're not, because your faith wavers so much. You remember in James chapter 1, I think, where if you pray without the certainty that God is listening and can move mountains, you were like a boat, in that sea. You were so easily moved and pushed along, but with our solid certainty and faith in Christ.
Think, for myself anyway, I'm that different from them because there's lots of times, even when people speak to me, you hear what you want to hear.
Yes.
Because you're raised a certain way. Do I see a scripture the way I want to see it?
Yeah. Through that
Because
lens.
sometimes somebody will bring something up and I'll go, wow, I never thought about that.
Yeah.
So I always have this preconceived notion of what everything's supposed to be.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I was listening to a show last night that was I think it's called the Life of Christ, but it's not like an over theological thing, but it kind of hits some cultural possibilities. Anyway, it was hitting John the Baptist, and it kind of came at a very different angle that I've always seen John the Baptist as he comes, he knows who Jesus is, he knows what Jesus is supposed to do. I mean, everything is clear for him. And so then you have to wonder, well, why would he then ask in chapter 11, I think, are you the guy? And so this approach kind of showed it as even John was seeing Jesus as the King of Israel, the one to save them. So with the miracles that he had done and with all that John heard about, are you the guy that we're supposed to be looking at? John couldn't help it either, but see things through a certain prism. I think that's a great point, because I don't know how many of us, if we're seeing Jesus as the King of Israel in terms of the Messiah, the anointed one, because who else was anointed that saved Israel? The father of Jesus, David. So it was very hard for them to see what Jesus was bringing, even as he made those statements, that I will be raised from the dead. What would that mean to them? I'll be raised from the dead. So, very, very interesting things. We're not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I put these specific from Matthew chapter 28 and on, just to give us an idea of how their presentation was expressed. In Matthew 28, an angel is dressed in brightness, which is where we are here. Mark's version is a young man dressed in bright clothes. So he's there and his clothes are there, but it's this, it's almost like someone is completely wrapped up in Christmas lights and they're all white kind of thing. Luke has the same idea, but in Luke there's two men dressed in bright clothes. In John 20, two angels are seated where Jesus' body had been. And then in verse 13, this interesting question that is offered. John 20 and verse 13. So starting up in verse 11, Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she stooped and looked in, and she saw two white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been laying. And two women, dear women, why are you crying? The angels asked her. Because they have taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they have put him. So this interesting question here by this angel, why are you crying? And the answer is they've taken away my Lord. Well, where would they have taken him away to? And who is they? Again, I think there's so many times as we read through these, whether it's we read them at Christmas for the resurrection, in whatever context we read these, we just kind of plow through this stuff, and there's some really, really good questions to ask as we kind of stop and consider some stuff here. Yeah.
I always like this account of John's. I do think that he is directly rebutting it started very early after Jesus ascended into heaven.
Yeah.
That the disciples had come and taken Jesus, right? And so I think John is really kind of rebutting that, because he's giving voice to that sentiment to Mary, thinking somebody had come and taken the body. But yet, no, Jesus is right there. In fact, he's talking to her.
Yeah. And kind of an interesting sidebar to that comment is, and it's something that I guess you don't really think about until you enter into this conversation of when these books were written in terms of timeline. It's believed that Matthew and a little bit of Luke were based upon Mark, because Mark, it seems, was based upon Peter. So you have Peter's experiences of things who was influencing Mark, and then Matthew gets some information from Mark as well as other people and writes his account for his purposes, which seems to be to the Jews that Jesus is the rightful king. But then when you get to John, and of course Luke, begins with, he's a doctor who's done a ton of research, and this is what he has found. So a lot of that research could have been from Mark and his experiences. So then when you get to John, it's believed that John was written mid-60s, mid-70s. So if you do the math, from when the church begins, 33-ish, how much later does John sit down and do his thing? It's a long time, right? I mean, don't get exact with the numbers, but it's a while. And so it's almost as if God has John wait until a lot of these things have been talked about, and not necessarily accusations, but all this chatter happens, and then John comes behind and follows up with his gospel. Of course, his gospel is completely different. It's not a historical narrative. It's as if someone came back to him 35 years later and said, "Tell me about Jesus." John's like, "Cool, let's do this." So he talks as if Jesus is was a close friend. This happened, and then this happened, and this guy did this, and man, Jesus did this, and it was incredible, and et cetera, et cetera. So when you get to this point, there's some chatter out there that the disciples came and did this, blah, blah, blah. And that's not what happened. With these women, why are you crying? And the other thing is, when you look at all four of these, you get such interesting perspectives and angles about different things as they happened. Is it the case that with Matthew and Mark, those things happened? Is it the case that later on, the women are in there kind of crying and wondering, where did he go and what happened and et cetera? Of course.
Answer, but I'm curious as to what about his appearance made it where she didn't recognize him at first?
Yeah.
If he chose not to allow her to recognize him, but then he did?
Right.
If that was his choice, or?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Well, even the disciples on the road to Emmaus, they're like literally walking and talking with him, and they have no idea. So it's interesting you bring that up, because I was a while back listening to a podcast that was trying to put those pieces together of the glorified Jesus, obviously, as opposed to the pre-crucified Jesus. And in terms of, and then what the disciples saw, he could walk through walls, if what we understand is true in terms of these narratives. So they're fun questions. And then the glorified Jesus goes up into heaven, as opposed to the man Jesus, in terms of pre versus post resurrection. Some fun things to consider and look at. So Matthew 24, and this is one of those chapters that really, really fascinates me in terms of the second coming of Jesus, and which I have some rather strong feelings about that. But when you consider, beginning in verse 30, and this may be something in the future that we get into, because today we have a lot of conversation about signs and rumors of wars and Jesus coming back, and it looks like it's fixing to happen, et cetera, et cetera. And some of that seems to be coming out of Matthew 24. But when you look at verse 30 and 31, and this is still within the pocket of content about the destruction of Jerusalem and when the temple is going to fall. And then at last, the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens, and there will be deep mourning among all the peoples of the earth. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with the mighty blast of a trumpet. They will gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. So one of the things I encourage you to notice as you read things like this is apocryphal language, which is not language about the end times, but it's just revealing language. It's the word apocrypha is the revelation of Jesus, the book of Revelation. That word there is apocryphal or apocrypha, apocalyptic language. So it's language with lots of color, lots of visuals. It's kind of like if you dream a really vivid dream, that's apocalyptic stuff. So throughout Matthew 24, you'll find a lot of this very metaphoric, visual type of stuff. And for us who aren't really familiar with that in terms of Hebrew and Jewish literature, when we read through this, we're like, holy cow, what is that going to look like and how's that going to be? But Jesus spoke a lot in metaphors. He spoke a lot in apocalyptic language that reveals and that shows stuff. When you go through the book of Revelation, goodness, 80% of Revelation, I think, is apocalyptic language. It's revealing, it's uncovering. A little aside here that really doesn't have anything to do with this, but I was noticing this, that whenever, after Noah gets off the ark, and then he builds his vineyard, and he gets drunk, and he goes in, and his sons go inside to see him, the Hebrew equivalent of the word apocalyptic is there, that Noah was found uncovered. So the Hebrew cousin to that Greek word is there in Genesis, that Moses was uncovered. That's all Revelation is. It's all apocalyptic literature is. It's uncovering or revealing. When John wrote Revelation, and he said that Jesus gave him this vision, all it is an uncovering of what's happening in terms of the church, in terms of heaven, etc., etc. So when we consider what's happening here, Jesus is uncovering through visuals the fact that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed, the temple is going to come down, because the Son of Man is coming for judgment after generations of disobedience. So most of what you read here, goodness, what's happening? And lights flashing in the west, and judgment and clouds and all these things. It's metaphoric language. And Jesus is talking about his power, his judgment, and what God is going to do to Jerusalem as a result of generations of disobedience. And he uses angels to describe, again in verse 31, he will send out his angels with a mighty blast of a trumpet. Where else did you hear that before? Angels with the mighty blast of a trumpet. 1 Thessalonians, when he talks about Jesus coming back to judgment, what are we going to have there? An angel blowing a trumpet. The voice of an archangel, the mighty blast of a trumpet, and it's announcing God's judgment, God's presence, etc. So angels are going to be involved somehow with the judgment, with the final days, etc., etc. Now, if this is helpful to you when you get to verse 36, this is how I understand it. I am very open to any other, interpretations, if you will. So verse, we may just, we'll stop with this. Up in verse 1 of Matthew 24, as Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. But he responded, "Do you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth that they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of the other." Later, Jesus sat down at the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came to him privately and said, "Hey, when's that going to happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world?" The word world there is the end of the age. And it seems to be that word age is like a predetermined time, an epoch, like a section of time. Like if we have a youth rally, that youth rally's age is going to be Friday night to Sunday morning. So the Greek word there, it's not infinite. It has limits to it, segments, if you will. So Jesus, I believe, takes verse 4 through verse 35 to explain to them about the destruction of Jerusalem, when that's going to happen. And then in verse 36, however, no one knows the day or the hour when these things, I believe he's talking about his return. No one knows I just lost it. There it is. No one knows the hour when these things will happen, not the angels in heaven or even the Son of himself. Only the Father knows. And I think there's a little bit of exaggeration there by Jesus, because a lot of people have to wonder, if Jesus is God and he's eternal and omnipotent and all those things, how does he not know? I think he's trying to metaphorically really affirm what not a secret, but nobody knows. It's not something that God is going to tell us, but it's going to be something. You remember that parable of the landowner that went away, and he didn't tell his people when he was coming back. He just said, just be ready, be working, get your job done, and at some point I'm going to come back. And then when he came back, what was their status? They weren't ready. So Jesus continues to tell these parables, these visuals, these revelations, if you will, of that judgment time that's going to come. You won't know when it is. He tells them up at the beginning, it's kind of like the days of Noah. Let's see, where is that? The days of Noah, they didn't know when the rain come till the rain come. I know that's not good grammar, but you know what I mean. So Jesus is telling them that's not something that's in the cards in terms of information. Not even the angels know, or even the Son of Man. Only the Father knows. There it is, verse 37. When the Son of Man returns, the second question, it will be like it was in Noah's day. In those days before the flood, people were enjoying banquets, parties, weddings right up to the time that Noah entered his boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came, swept them all away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. So finally, and I know the last bell is rung, but I want to also encourage you in terms of reading these things. But earlier it said the Son of Man is going to come in judgment in Jerusalem. Now it says the Son of Man is going to come and you don't know when it is. Well, find your context, find your verses, and see where he's plugging in that term. Is the Son of Man going to come for the destruction of Jerusalem? Yes. Is the Son of Man going to come for the return and judge all people? Yes. So he's going to do it in both cases. One, you can tell when it's going to happen. The other one, there's no information. And then you get into the 2 men will be working in the field and 2 women will be grinding, and pregnancy and different things that come. If you know how to read this stuff, and I'm not saying that I'm great at it, then it just makes so much more sense. And we don't have to get caught up in a lot of the religious rhetoric right now that's going on and get worried about what might be happening. Our world's been messed up for a long time, hadn't it? Are we any worse now than we've been in the last 600 years? We're not. Our world's messed up. It's broken. And so for us to look around and go, hey, there's this happening in the Middle East. There's this happening over here. There's famine. There's this. There's shortages. Well, that's been going on since for a very, very long time. All right. Any thoughts? Any comments? All right. So let's see. I do want us to look at this on the 17th because this is some interesting stuff, I think. And I think we have one more slide after that. And so on the 24th, no, that probably wouldn't be a good time. We'll start on January the 7th, and we'll get into dreams, and I think that'll be a really, really cool study for you. So let's close with a prayer. Loving God, we thank you. We desire to be with you in a relationship. Father, thank you for all of this content that you give us. Father, help us to be intent on being honest as we study and as we grow. Help us to slow down in our study and ask questions and allow you to help us to learn and grow in your wisdom. We pray this in the great name of Jesus. Amen.